My day 6 takes me back to Netflix in the Monster series starring Charlie Hunnam as Ed Gein. Now, I'm not going to give you any spoilers, but I feel like you guys know the story. This is a really good series to dive into this time of year because Ed Gein is truly a monster. There is nothing, and I mean nothing, that we can sit here and talk about in a positive way with Ed Gein. We could sit here and look at the way he was grown up and the way he was, completely, really broken down by his mother and all of the psychological damage it did. But let's be real. This man had evil from the get-go, and it shows. Now, this story has really spawned off a ton of some of our most famous horror movies, as well as other crimes. We're looking at Psycho, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, Silence of the Lambs, and many others have drew inspiration, direct scenes from his real-life murders into the film. And I think that that's something to be looked at because it just shows you how twisted and dark it was, especially back at the time that he did. This is unheard of, right? This was when movies were just dabbling into horror and we were getting out of the Dracula and vampire movement, and we had this. And Alfred Hitchcock took advantage of this, and so did so many others. And this series does an interesting job at showing both the story of Ed and what he did and who he was involved with and the horrible crimes and how basically people kind of just ignored the red flags. And then it brings us into the modern, quote unquote, modern times of Hollywood and how they pulled from him, and we got some of these most famous slasher movies like the Texas Chainsaw Massacre. He was the dark inspiration for so much. But what's really interesting is just how so many people knew something isn't right, something's off, and because of the time and the town that he lived in, they ignored it. He did not, I will say this, he did not have a female accomplice at all. Matter of fact, the female or the girlfriend that he had in real life did speak out about this. She later retracted her statement as she started to gain some popularity, but she talked about how she loved him. He was strange and he was obsessed with crime, but he never talked about his crimes. She never took pictures of the bodies that he had. So that is completely fabricated in the film. The other thing that's fabricated in the film is his voice. Ed Gein had a soft, childlike voice, but in this film it was artistic interpretation that made him kind of sound like a cross between Zoolander and, well, a child. Not really a fan of that. I also don't like the way that they sat there and tried to kind of give us, a little tone of like, well, we should feel bad for him because look at what happened. No. We need to stop that, okay? We need to stop looking at these monsters in a sympathetic way. We can sit there and say that's horrible, but if you take his mother out of the picture, Ed Gein very much was a mentally disturbed individual, and these crimes were probably going to happen regardless. I'm not going to sit here and give sympathy for that. If you do, that's fine. But I don't like the way that this particular series kind of highlights that, makes him vulnerable as he wears a face of another human being as a mask. That being said, I think it's done well. The series gets choppy at times. You start to dive into Ed Gein and the moments and what are happening, and then it fast forwards to the making of Leatherface, and then it goes back. And I don't think that was the way to do it. I'm not sure which was the proper way to tackle that. I think it was kind of important to show, but I think the bouncing back and forth was something I wasn't into. There's definitely a lot of disturbing moments there, not just from Ed Gein, but others in the film. So I don't know. I think it was a big move to kind of tackle it that way, as so many directors drew inspiration from these horrible killings. But I also think that the way that they did it, just for me, was kind of choppy. He does a great job as this individual, except for that voice that at times I just can't get by. But there's other moments where he kind of tones it down a little and it still feels like this mild-mannered, weird, old, backwards dude who's out there just doing horrific things. Let me know what you think. It is currently streaming on Netflix.